Hi everybody, welcome to my channel, Life, Law, Bin. Hi good people, welcome back to the channel. I do have with me a very familiar face, and it's Beatrice Baskett. We actually have gone quite far back together, haven't we, Bea? We studied law together at the undergraduate level, so I've known Beatrice probably for about 4 or 5 years now. Um, so it's been quite a while. And today I'm happy to have her on the show with us because we're continuing our pupillage series, and she's going to be talking about securing a pupillage in personal injury and clinical negligence. I'm sure that the tips she will provide can be applied to any pupillage, but for those of you who are really keen on pursuing personal injury and or clinical negligence, this is definitely the episode for you. Now, before we delve into the substantive matter, let me just share a fun fact about Bea. She plays the drums and she would have started playing at about 11 years old, and she has experience of playing in a few bands. So Beatrice, thanks for joining.
Thanks so much for having me.
Good. Now let's start. Now we know you started your journey into law at Newcastle University. Can you provide a brief overview of that experience for viewers?
Yeah, of course. So, as you said, we both were at Newcastle, so you can both testify to the great experience that we had there. My time at Newcastle was very fun. It's a great city to be a student in, but actually at the law school, really enjoyed the structure of the course. We were in final year able to explore some different modules that were of interest to us. Which allowed me to explore things like family. And although I didn't end up in that, a great experience to have to help you make those decisions. Throughout my time at Newcastle, I was heavily involved in our bar society. I was the treasurer in second year and the president in final year. And that was really important and a big part of my journey in meeting people and deciding the path that was right for me. I did a few roles at Newcastle as well, which spoke heavily about in my pupillage applications. So I worked as an advisor for the Newcastle Citizens Advice Bureau. We also had some pro bono roles that you could get involved in. We both did Mackenzie Friend and working as a caseworker for the National Centre for Domestic Violence. And all in all, yeah, it was an amazing 3 years. I met amazing people and I feel very lucky to have such a good uni experience.
Wonderful. I don't think there are really and truly any real negative experiences at studying at Newcastle. I think the city is wonderful, absolutely fantastic to be in as a student, and it's quite reasonable to live in as well. Now, B, I know you went on then to study the bar course at the Inns of Court College of Advocacy, affectionately known as ICA, and you were part of that first cohort to undertake the bar course there. How was that experience for you? Should students definitely consider ICA?
Yeah, we were the guinea pig year. It was funny. It was funny applying for a course where there was no alumni to sort of speak to about it or watch how they'd gone through the whole process. Um, but having said that, it didn't feel like a complete leap of faith because they did a lot of talks and selection days, and you knew you were being taught by either people who are currently practicing barristers or who've retired from the bar. Some of the teachers are part-time judges and recorders, and so you know that you're being taught by people who have a whole realm of experience. My experience of ICA was a very positive one. The thing that sort of stood out to me most about the course was its two-part structure. So part one, you study for the BSB exams that are compulsory on the bar course. You sit them in December. You then have a couple of months off, and you then come and do part two in person. My part two was taught in Gray's Inn, which is my Inns of Court. And I was lucky enough to live in Gray's Inn, so that hugely appealed to me, having part two within the precincts of the inns themselves. And something else that was really important to me with the course is, no doubt we'll talk about it in more detail, but the amount of work that goes into pupillage applications. And the great thing about the ICA course is from December, beginning of December to March. Yeah, it was March. I had no lessons. I was completely off. I'd done my exams and I was getting ready for part two. And it meant that all those months where these applications really need a lot of focus, you're doing interviews, you're prepping for them, they were the main thing that I needed to do in those months and could really devote all of my time to. And so I feel like the sort of application cycle of Pupilage goes very well hand in hand with the structure of the ICA course. If you do the cycles that I've just said, so starting in September, there's options to do it at different times. But for me, that worked really well.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something to consider because I know that I did my bar course at the University of Law, and when it's full time and in person all year round, it can get quite challenging trying to juggle applying for pupillage and also meeting those demands and the other demands that come on the bar course year, which may be qualifying sessions and preparing accordingly. So I think that's definitely something to bear in mind. And something that our viewers don't know, we also served in that bar course year on the Aegis Committee, so the Association of Grazing Students Committee. So we linked up there again.
A lot of connections.
I can't seem to get rid of you. One of us seems to be following each other. No, we know that you said you've applied for pupillage and you had a successful application. Do you think that there's any work in terms of legal or non-legal experience that you believed aided your applications?
Sure, yeah. So sort of focusing on the legal side of it first, I think that working as an advisor for the Citizens Advice Bureau was hugely beneficial. That was a voluntary role. Anyone can get involved with their local CAB. You can go online and look up different positions. The role of advisor was, it's challenging, but it's hugely rewarding. You go to your local CAB and members of the public who need advice on any aspect of their life come in. So when you're speaking to people, I dealt with people who had questions about benefits, immigration, housing, employment, and you have supervisors where you can discuss the needs of each client, the laws that are applicable if there are any, and then can sort of signpost them and assist them. And that was a really great experience for me in all areas of society. You learn about the demographics of people, you learn about a whole wide range of issues and the sort of laws and rules that govern them. And so I think that was really great at giving me that exposure, but also improving my communication skills and being in an environment where from the offset you are giving advice, something that you're going to go on as a career and a barrister doing throughout all of your years there. So a lot of people picked up on that. A lot of people wanted to ask questions about that, and it gave me a wide variety of experiences to talk about. But having said that, I wouldn't underplay the value of life experience and non-legal. And I think quite a lot of applicants, it's quite easy to think, oh, you're not already a barrister. Of course you're not, no one is. But it's quite easy to get tied into thinking you need all of this legal experience. And when I was growing up, sort of around 16, I worked as a waitress at a local hotel, and lots of people wanted to ask me about that. You learn a huge amount from jobs that are entirely different, and perhaps customer service and customer facing roles. So I think, whilst those were two of the experiences which really helped me, as long as you can pick out sort of the life experience and the transferable skills from any role you've done and how they'll be applicable going forward, I think they'll be really rewarding to any application.
Excellent. And I know too that working as a waitress or even working with the Citizens Advice Bureau you also are exposed to different members of society, including vulnerable persons who are seeking advice. And I do recognize that Chambers does like to ensure that you can communicate with all members of society. And communication isn't just, as persons may recognize, not talking the law at them, but simplifying it and
Yeah, totally.
making it easy for them to understand. So,
And I think if I just add to that, I think as a barrister, my understanding of the job is quite often you meet people at crisis points in their life. Be that family, be that PI and connect, someone's had something go wrong to them, which, treatment hasn't gone as they'd hoped, and they are now in a crisis moment of their life. If you have any roles or experiences where you've dealt with people, as you said, members of society at Citizens Advice Bureau, quite often the people who come in, they don't want to be there. They're there for a reason. They've had some form of crisis or some difficulty that's cropped up in their life. And if you've had any role or job where you have dealt with members of society at points in their life where they need help and assistance, you're on the right track to not only helping and sort of getting that passion for that side of the career, but also drawing out the skills that are going to help you in the application stage and also further down the line.
yeah, I think that's a brilliant point. Do you think that you had any extracurricular activities which aided your pupillage applications as well?
Yeah, so beyond what I've already spoken about, I'd say that getting involved with a university bar society is a great way to learn more about the profession, learn more about the application side of it, and sort of start tailoring those experiences in other areas like mooting and advocacy. At Newcastle, we set up a mentoring scheme during my time on the society. And that was hugely beneficial because I think there can be quite a tendency when you perhaps don't know many people at the bar to see it as a sort of profession that has a lot of barriers to it. And there's lots of discussions about how to improve access and diversity, and having a mentor scheme and people who are directly involved in the profession that you're aspiring to be in, I think is a huge aid in completing your applications, but also allowing you to see the way forward. Imposter syndrome is something that many people experience. It's something that I had throughout my entire time in applying for pupillage. And so whilst it's really important to have all of those experiences, something that really helped me was speaking to people who'd been through the application process themselves, and speaking to normal people, speaking to people who later become friends, and sort of seeing that side of it really drove me to keep the motivation throughout that application process.
I agree. And I think one thing that's clear is about how to use your connections effectively. I think it goes beyond just trying to connect with people on LinkedIn, but establishing genuine, real connections. So things like what you did with the bar society at Newcastle, because it's continuing to flourish at Newcastle presently, creating mentorship schemes and making genuine connections, connecting with these people, communicating and finding ways for them to work with aspiring barristers. I think that though that's the way to create meaningful connections at the bar, rather than just using your LinkedIn as a tool to just press connect and follow and never ever communicate with people. Now this is the exciting stage now. Everything has been helpful now, but I know that our viewers are really interested in what you have to say about pupillage itself. Now, why did you choose to apply for a specialist pupillage with a 50-50 split in personal injury and clinical negligence?
So for me, I was a bit of an interesting candidate in that I applied for different pupillages. So I've ultimately ended up with a PI and clin-neg pupillage. I did apply for some common law ones as well. And for me, the process of knowing what I wanted to do was continuing throughout the application cycle. Even at that point, I was trying to find the best fit for me. But the ultimate decision to undertake a PI and clin-neg pupillage can be traced back actually to my time at school. I, at school, started off thinking that I wanted to go into medicine. I chose all science A levels, and very swiftly in the first few weeks of studying them, realised that it wasn't for me. And whilst I was interested in science, I didn't see myself doing it throughout my career. So I swapped some of my A levels to some humanitarian subjects, and it explored in the extended project qualification. That's something that a lot of people can do at school, where you research a topic that's of interest to you. And I did sort of consent laws and combine that scientific interest with the sort of legal interest that I was exploring. So that's sort of where my interest came from. And then as I went through university, I realised that law, and in particular the bar, was the path that I wanted to go on. But still having this sort of scientific interest that I'd had at one point, when we were doing tort law, and sort of beyond that, sort of seeing the personal injury side and the medical side cropping through, it sort of seemed like a perfect way of combining those two interests together and going forward. And people say the great thing about medicine is, you help patients, you have that sort of side of things, while in PI and Clinic, equally, you can be an advocate for patients and for people going through medical treatment, but on the slightly different side. So it was a real combination of interest. It took me a while to figure out. And as I say, I applied for multiple pupillages in different areas. So you don't actually have to know at the outset as well, as long as you're tailoring applications, explore those interests and those chambers throughout the whole process.
I think that's definitely a good point, because many applicants don't know, and I think it's okay not to know specifically what you want to do. And I agree that we just have to kind of tailor our applications. Now, I know some people believe that they must have experience in the areas that they want to do a specialist pupillage in. But I think you raised a good point there, that it can actually be from life experience. So you got it from mixing your humanitarian subjects with your scientific interests. Did you have any experience in particularly any of these two areas before, other than the life experience? And would you say that you think it was very important to have kind of work experience in these areas in order to apply for that pupillage?
So what I'd say is, different people take different routes to the bar. I am someone who's come straight through. So as you said, we did our undergraduate degree together. I went straight through to doing the bar course and applied for pupillage during the bar course. So my sort of interest and experience are things that I've done alongside. I haven't been able, whilst I'm working now as a paralegal, having finished my education, I haven't had a sort of specific year or 2 years where I was working and sort of able to gather that interest. So I'd say, I did have some experience, and I think that is important. But I think what's mainly important is your interest and your drive for that subject, but you have things to back up why you have that interest. So I'd done some mini pupillages in personal injury and clinical negligence, and that was a great way to see in action that area of law. At the Citizens Advice Bureau, one of the projects that I undertook was the Mesothelioma Project. So that's something that CAB runs, where people who've been affected by industrial disease and mesothelioma specifically can come for advice. So within the roles that I was doing, there were certain things that tailored more to PI and Clin-Neg. And so I think it's really about drawing those out and reassuring the chambers that you're applying to why it is an educated decision. I don't think they're expecting anyone to have, all of the experience. Some people have it as a second career, some people were maybe a doctor first, or can describe that. But I think as long as you have that interest and that passion, and you can draw out from the experience that you have how you demonstrate that interest, that's the most important thing.
And how do you think applicants can determine whether a specialist pupillage, rather than a generalist pupillage, is ideal for them?
It's a very boring answer, but it is probably doing your research with it. There are pros and cons to both. There are also pros and cons to both, depending on the geographical area in which you study it and undertake pupillage in. So for me, it was weighing up whether I wanted to put all of my efforts and focus into one area of interest, specialize very quickly, and then the hope is that you have further exposure to cases that are higher profile because you're gaining so much experience in that area so quickly. If you undertake a common law pupillage, you'll be doing a split of crime, family, and civil, which means that you will only be devoting roughly a third of your time to each of those areas. So it was, for me, weighing that up and sort of the broad experience I'd gain, albeit that I'd only be able to devote a third of my time to each of those areas, or if in reality my interest really did lie with PI and clin-neg, and I'd be much happier having 100% of my time on that subject and gaining experience at, sort of 3 times the pace I would have done if I was doing multiple areas. So I think it's really a balance between where your interest lies, how much you want to sort of progress that interest and the pace you want to progress it at, or whether you're someone who would suit sort of specializing as you went on in your years at the bar.
That's a very sensible response. Now let's move on to the preparatory stage. Can you describe that stage, the preparation you employed when applying to chambers?
Sure. So I made a table, first of all. That was the first thing I did. I had a column listing chambers, a column listing the type of pupillage. I then think my other columns were what city is it in and what is their application process. To then fill in the chambers and find out where I was interested in applying, I looked on the Pupillage Gateway website. That's great in showing all of the vacancies available, but also I, in my head, thought I'd either like to practice in London, maybe in the Western Circuit, or maybe in the Northeast Circuit where we were at university. So another resource that's great to use for filling in that chambers column is looking on the circuit websites, if you know sort of the geographical areas that you're interested in, because they will list all of the chambers on that circuit. And I use that as a tool as well to sort of ascertain the geographical location of chambers that I was interested in. So I began off filling that table in. The other column that was really important was their application process. I applied to some chambers that used the Gateway form, which is sort of a standardized form. I applied to some that were off Gateway and had their own application form, and I applied to some which were a CV and a covering letter as their application. So I think at that preliminary stage, ascertaining where it is you want to apply for and what they're asking for and any deadlines that come along with that is a sort of really good place to start at getting organized, because it's chaotic and lots of chambers want different things. So getting your head around that, I think, is a really important starting point.
And just to think about it, when you move on from that preliminary starting point, is your next step just to start drafting? Or do you prioritize your chambers and then start working on the application according to your list of priorities?
Yeah, sort of prioritizing was the approach I took. I think my list was hugely long and I wouldn't have been able to write applications to all of the chambers that had made it into my grid table. So I think I started off by researching chambers more. Some I knew I definitely wanted to apply to, some I had many pupillages at, or some I'd had direct experience and involvement with in other ways, be that open days or similar events. So some I knew would remain in the table and others I needed to learn a bit more about. So my next stage was sort of looking up, during pupillage time, a lot of chambers will have open evenings or Zoom webinars. And so it was familiarising myself with those to then ensure that I was making an educated decision in applying to the chambers. So I narrowed my chambers list down to about 15. And then at that point is when I went off and started drafting answers.
You see, I always like to ask about the practicalities, because I think the worst thing to do, especially in such limited time, is to get the practical aspect wrong. Because if you start at the wrong stage, just telling yourself, okay, I'm going to apply to this chambers, and then recognize, oh crap, I really don't know enough. You've wasted time starting to write
And
it.
also, yeah, and also not neglecting that first stage, because it's so easy
Yeah,
to
it's
say
easy.
applications have gone live, quick, let's get writing. But I think you need to have that sort of step back where you look at the bigger picture, you look at where you're applying, what areas, what specialisms, and sort of taking that time then means that all the rest of the months where you're drafting and submitting, you have a bit more of a plan to follow and keep on track to.
Yeah, and prioritizing as well, because you really don't want to start at the bottom of your list when you have a chambers that's really more suited to you at the top, and you leave them for last and end up writing a sloppy application. Now, I know we spoke about legal experience before, but do you think it really matters what kind of legal experience applicants have on their CV when applying for a specialist pupillage?
Um, I don't think it does, as long as you can highlight why it is that you're applying for this specialist pupillage. I did detail legal experience in other areas on my applications, and I don't think that hindered me, as long as I could justify why it was that I was applying for a PI and connect pupillage. So, for example, it can be really beneficial having experience in other areas to show you that that's not the area you want to go in. And if that's the case, it's great that you sort of did that experience to make sure it was an educated decision. So I think as long as you can show why it is you're here at this point in time with an application in front of them, go for it. What you don't want is for them to say, I'm really confused, why is she applying for a specialist pupillage, when actually she worked in the criminal sector for a couple of years, she only has work experience in family, and while I'm reading those experience, I'm not entirely sure what transferable skills we're focusing on that would aid them at a career at our chambers in this area. So definitely don't wipe your CV of all the brilliant things you've done in different areas. Just tailor it. Pick out the skills that'll help you going forward, and also why it is that you're here applying for this.
Seems as though justification is the buzzword here. So just justify
Definitely.
justify and tailor. Now,
And transferable skills, yeah.
yeah, and we're at the written stage now. So what are the most important tips that applicants should be aware of during the written stage of this process?
Okay, I'm going to turn to some notes that I've made. I've
Please
come
do.
prepared
Please do.
because I didn't want to miss things, and it's important, isn't it, that you get it right. So for me, I think the aspects of a good written application start long before applying for pupillage. And what I mean by that is when you're undertaking mini pupillages and other legal work experience, you need to be taking a good note of what it is that you're seeing. Because when you come to do your pupillage applications and you have 150 words to summarize a week's mini pupillage, you want to know exactly what it is you did, what it is you enjoyed, and what it is you learned, so that you can succinctly describe it on this form. So I think from the outset, if you still have someone who's watching this, things coming up like mini pupillages, start now at sort of making sure that you do yourself a favour for when it comes to pupillage applications. The second thing I'd say, and it's a piece of advice, I only applied for one cycle, so I was very fortunate to get it on the first time that I applied. But a piece of advice that I took with me into my written applications was, it's quite generic and sort of corny, but being yourself. And I remember listening to someone talk about their written application, and they said that the year that they got pupillage was the year they stopped trying to sound like a barrister. And that sort of stuck with me, and it's something that I very much took with me through the written stage of writing genuinely why I want to be a barrister, why it is I'm applying, and not just writing what it is I think they want to hear. because I think they can see through that. So being yourself throughout the application, it sounds obvious, but I think it's your best skill that you have. So certainly that, and give yourself time as well. A lot of my applications had different questions, and some I had to reflect on for a few days before I had an answer. I had some that were, what is your biggest weakness? Or perhaps, what is a mistake that you've made in your life and what did you learn from it? That's not something that I certainly could have just written down. It took me time to think about and reflect on before I had an answer. Similarly, questions that are debate topics or law reform topics, they require research and time for you to think about them. So give yourself time to do the applications and make sure that you really set aside the necessary time to look up all the things that you need to. Also, I would say, so from a more practical perspective, in my written applications for the questions that were, tell us about the prizes and awards you have, or perhaps tell us about experience that you have, I answered those questions in a more bullet point format to make sure that I made the most of the word count and I got in all of the experience that I have that I think is relevant. I also think that that sort of way of approaching those questions can be helpful for the person who's marking the application. If they have a pile of 100 applications, they want to make sure that they see all of the experiences of yours that are relevant without having to sort of skim read through paragraphs and paragraphs. So I took a sort of bullet point approach to those style questions. And then the questions that were more competency based, or why this chambers, why this area, I wrote those in prose. Once I'd written my applications, I would print them off and read them out loud. Sounds like a funny thing to do, but actually reading, when you're writing an application, it's very easy to sort of just get into the habit of reading the same sentences to the point where you're not actually properly reading them anymore. And so printing them off and reading them out loud, sentences sound very different. And doing that sort of made me figure out where I'd repeated a word or where something sounded very similar to something I'd written before, which you can sort of get lost in. And then a final thing I've touched upon is use resources that are out there. Applying for a career at the bar, you're so fortunate in the sense that you're applying for a profession that is so collegiate and so supportive, and really, you know, your channel is a testimony to people wanting to give back to those who are applying and to the community that the profession provides you with. And pupillage application season is no different to that. There are so many resources available to you, and it's up to you to utilise them. And there's a scheme on Pupilage and how to get it, where you can apply for someone to read your application and provide advice on it. I sent an application off through that scheme. I applied to a scheme in my Inns of Court, Gray's Inn. They had an opportunity where you could send a written application off and get feedback on it. I did that. I went to see my career supervisor on my bar course, who very kindly read an application for me. And I utilised the mentor scheme and the connections I'd made from previous experiences. So don't feel like you're alone at that written application stage. Utilise all those things around you. And get as many people as possible reading and providing feedback on your application that you can then tailor into amending and making sure that every time you draft it, it's better and better until the deadline. That was a whirlwind for you there. There's lots of things, but
No, but I think if people apply those tips, and they're very, very handy and helpful, I think they would definitely advance to the interview stage. I know